G'day everyone, and welcome to week 7 of LA 3006 Administrative Law. I hope you've all had an opportunity to recover from our really full-on week 6. Happily, this week has much less content, even though it's just as important. Joyfully, we're only going to need 2 videos this week. This week, we're looking at the remedies available when a decision is reviewed by the courts. So we have a decision of an administrative nature made under an enactment. Our client is not happy with the outcome, and we have identified that there are grounds for review. We bring those grounds before the court, and the court agrees with us. What can the court do about it? Well, in the first video, we're going to go back and revisit those common law writs which we dealt with way back in week 2. Remember, those common law writs are still available in the federal jurisdiction, particularly in relation to jurisdictional errors of law, but also under the Judiciary Act 1903 in relation to broader errors of law. In the second video this week, we're going to look at remedies available to the courts under the ADJR Act, and what you'll see is that the remedies are all very similar to the common law remedies. Okay, before we begin though, I want to lower your expectations. Most students expect, really just as a matter of common sense, that remedies in administrative law will be pretty simple. If the court thinks the decision was made wrongly, the court should just be able to change the decision. Wrong. The one thing the court cannot do is just change the decision, and there are some super important reasons for this. I'm going to hit you with 2. First, remember the separation of powers as it's practiced here under the Westminster system. The judiciary is kept firmly separate from the legislature or the executive. Administrative decisions are meant to be made by the executive. If the judiciary just started changing administrative decisions, well, in effect, we'd have the judiciary making administrative decisions. That's just straight up not allowed. Second, remember that legal review is concerned with whether the decision has been made properly, and not with whether the decision is any good. It's perfectly possible that even though the decision maker didn't comply with the rules, they might still have ended up making the right decision. For instance, a decision maker might reject an application, but in doing so, they might fail to take into account a particular piece of evidence. That invalidates the decision. But it still might be that even if they had taken that evidence into account, they might still have rejected the application. So even if the court finds that there was an error in decision making, that doesn't mean the outcome should necessarily be changed. So what can the court do? Well, for starters, remember that the court can issue a writ of Mandamus, which requires someone in government to do something. That was Curtis's case, the one where the escheator was instructed to go and deal with the land of a deceased person. So if the court agrees that a government decision maker has a duty, such as, for instance, a duty to give natural justice to a party, well, the court can go ahead and make an order requiring that to happen. Mandamus can also be used in order to remit a decision, which means it can be used to send that decision back to the original decision maker for them to make the decision again. So if the court's considering a decision, and the court agrees that the decision has not been made properly according to law, the court can send the decision back to the original decision maker with an order of Mandamus, which says you have a duty to decide this application properly in accordance with law. Go back and perform that duty. We need to be super careful here though. Mandamus can say go back and make the decision again, but it can't say go back and change the decision to this, because that would be merits review. The courts can't do that. Second, the court can issue a writ of prohibition, which prohibits the decision maker from carrying out their decision. You might remember back in week 3 we talked about Langdale's case, where the court prohibited the church court from making a decision about maintenance. In the modern context, a court might grant prohibition where the decision maker in fact had no jurisdiction. So let's say a decision maker issued a decision stating that they intended to knock down an old building in order to develop a highway. But let's say that decision maker only had powers in relation to roads, and not in relation to heritage sites. If the court was asked to review that decision under the common law, the court might issue prohibition, prohibiting anyone from knocking down the building until an application had been made to the heritage authorities. Can you see how, again, the court has been able to do really useful things without suddenly becoming a de facto administrative decision maker? Third, the court could issue a writ of habeas corpus to bring someone out of detention and before the court. What happens after that, though, depends on whether the detention decision was made properly. If the detention decision was not made properly, and that was the case in Bolton and Bean, the one with the Vietnam deserter, if the detention decision was not made properly, then the person will be released. If the detention decision was made properly, and that was the case in Al-Kateb, the stateless guy who had nowhere to be deported to, if the detention decision was made properly, then the person is returned to detention. Finally, in jurisdictions where it still exists, the court could consider a writ of quo warranto. Remember, that's the one where you demand proof of the decision maker's authority to make the decision. Quo warranto isn't a remedy, though. Like habeas corpus and certiorari, it's a way of getting a matter in front of the court. If the decision maker is found not to have the relevant powers, then the actual remedy is more likely to be prohibition, where the court would be saying, you've made a decision without any authority to make that decision, so we prohibit you from carrying the decision out. Remember though, when I say jurisdictions where it still exists, that does not include Queensland, where the law has specifically struck out the writ of quo warranto. So those are the common law remedies. In addition, there are two equitable remedies. The first is injunction. An injunction can make someone do things, that's mandatory injunction, or it can stop someone doing things, that's a prohibitive injunction. Injunction, though, is a lot more likely to be ordered on an interim basis to stop things from happening while the review is heard. The second equitable remedy is really cool. This is called declaration. Declaration happens if the court simply declares something to be true. It's a remedy that you can obtain even if no practical remedy can be offered. So let's say you were denied a passport and as a result you were unable to travel overseas to your daughter's wedding. Now, by the time such an issue comes to court, there's really not a lot the court could do. Even if there was Mandamus to properly consider the passport application, the wedding has long since passed. But you could still go to the court and seek a declaration that your passport application had not been properly considered. A great example is a case called McClelland and the Burning Palm Surf Lifesaving Club. Mr. McClelland, a long-serving member of the club, had been borrowing money from the club's raffle proceeds. This had been tolerated for a while, but then the borrowings got too large and he couldn't repay them. The club met and a vote was taken to expel him. He took action to challenge this decision, and one of the things he sought was a declaration that his expulsion had been invalid. Now, he was unsuccessful, but you can see that if the court had decided in his favour, it would have been a substantial moral victory. Declaration provides more than just moral outcomes, though. If a court was to make a declaration that a department, for instance, had invalidly withdrawn a licence, the usual practice is the department would give the greatest credit to that decision, which in practice would mean reversing its previous decision. Remember, though, that declaration is not an excuse for courts to sneakily begin reviewing the merits. Courts will not make a declaration as to the merits of a decision, only as to its validity under one of the grounds of review that we've discussed in the past few weeks. So those are our non-statutory remedies. You don't see them used that much anymore because the ADJR Act really is the key piece of legislation. But under the right circumstances, it's still open to a party to seek mandamus, which tells a decision maker to fulfil a duty, or prohibition, which makes them stop, or to seek the equitable remedies of injunction or declaration. Now, in the second video, you'll get a bit of deja vu, because just as the ADJR Act confirmed many of the old common law grounds for review, it also gave statutory form to many of the common law remedies. Let's have a look.